Chapter 3. I have never seen a game of football in my life, but as the new owner of the Texas Lone Stars, I couldn't exactly say that to a crowd of reporters who mobbed the SUV when we pulled up to the stadium any more than I could have admitted the off-shoulder jersey and metallic blue cowboy boots I was wearing felt about as authentic as a Halloween costume. "Lower the window," Alyssa told me, and smile and yell, "Go Lone Stars!" I didn't want to lower the window. I didn't want to smile. I didn't want to yell anything, but I did it, because this was a Cinderella story, and I was the star. Avery, look over here! How are you feeling about your first game as a new owner? Do you have any comments about the reports that you assaulted Sky Hawthorne? I hadn't had much media training, but I had enough to know the cardinal rule of having reporters shout questions at you rapid fire. Don't answer. Pretty much the only thing I was allowed to say was that I was excited, grateful, awed, and overwhelmed in the most incredible possible way. So I did my best to channel excitement, gratitude, and nearly hundreds of thousands of people have been attending the game tonight. Millions were watching around the world cheering for the team. My team. "Go Lone Stars!" I yelled. I went to roll up my window, but just as my finger brushed the button, a figure pulled away from the crowd. Not a reporter. My father. Ricky Grahams had spent his lifetime treating me like an afterthought, if that. I hadn't seen him in more than a year, but now that I inherited billions, there he was. Turning away from him and the paparazzi, I rolled my window up. "Ave," Libby's voice was hesitant as our bulletproof SUV disappeared into the private parking garage beneath the stadium. My sister was an optimist. She believed the best of people, including a man who'd never done a damn thing for either one of us. "Do you know he'd be here?" I asked her, my voice low. "No," Libby said. "I swear." She caught her bottom lip between her teeth, smudging her black lipstick. "But he just wants to talk." "I bet he does." Up in the driver's seat, Orrin, my head of security, parked the SUV and spoke calmly into his earpiece. "We have a situation near the north entrance. Eyes only, but I want a full report." The nice thing about being a billionaire with a security team brimming with retired special forces was that the chances of my being ambushed again were next to none. I shoved down the feelings that seeing Ricky had dredged up and stepped out of a car into the bowels of one of the biggest stadiums in the world. "Let's do this," I said. "For the record," Alyssa told me as she exited the car, "the firm is more than capable of handling your father." And that was the nice thing about being a sole client of a multi-billion-dollar law firm. "Are you okay?" Alyssa pressed. She wasn't exactly the touchy-feely type. More like she was trying to assess whether I would be a liability tonight. "I'm fine," I said. "Why wouldn't she be?" That voice, low and smooth, came from the elevator behind me. For the first time in 7 days, I turned and looked directly at Grayson Hawthorne. He had pale hair and ice-gray eyes, and cheekbones sharp enough to count as weapons. 2 weeks ago, I would have said that he was the most self-assured, self-righteous, arrogant jerk I'd ever met. I wasn't sure what to say about Grayson Hawthorne now. "Why," he repeated crisply, stepping out of the elevator, "would Avery be anything other than fine?" "Deadbeat Dad made an appearance. Outside," I muttered. "It's fine." Grayson stared at me, his eyes piercing mine, then turned to Orrin. "Is he a threat?" "I'll always protect you," he'd sworn. "But this, us, it can't happen, Avery." "I don't need you to protect me," I told Grayson sharply. "When it comes to Ricky, I'm an expert at protecting myself." I stalked past Grayson into the elevator he stepped out of a moment earlier. The trick to being abandoned was to never let yourself long for anyone who left. A minute later, when the elevator doors opened into the owner's suite, I stepped out, Alyssa to one side and Orrin on the other, and I didn't so much as look back at Grayson. Since he'd taken the elevator down to meet me, he'd obviously already been up here, probably schmoozing, without me. "Avery, you made it!" Zara Hawthorne Caligrass wore a string of delicate pearls around her neck. There was something about her sharp-edged smile that made me feel like she could probably kill a man with those pearls if she were so inclined. "I wasn't sure you'd be putting in an appearance tonight." "And you were ready to hold court in my absence," I concluded. I thought about what Alyssa had said about allies and power players and the influence that could be bought with a ticket to this suite. As Jameson would say, game on. Chapter 4. The owner's suite had a perfect view of the 50-yard line, but an hour before kickoff, no one was looking at the field. The suite extended back and widened, and farther you got from the seats, the more it looked like an upscale bar or club. Tonight, I was the entertainment, an oddity, a curiosity, a paper doll dressed up just so. For what felt like an eternity, I shook hands and posed for photographers and pretended to understand football jokes. I managed not to gawk at a pop star, a former vice president, a tech giant who probably made more money in the time it took him to urinate than most people make in a lifetime. My brain pretty much stopped functioning when I heard the phrase, Her Highness, and realized there was actual royalty in attendance. Alyssa must have sensed I was reaching my limit. It's almost time for kickoff, she said, laying one hand lightly on my shoulder, probably to keep me from fleeing. Let's get you in your seat. I made it until halftime, then bolted for real. Grayson intercepted me. Wordlessly, he nodded to one side, then started walking, confident that I would follow. Despite myself, I did. What I found was a second elevator. This one goes up, he told me. Going anywhere with Grace and Hawthorne was probably a mistake, but given the alternative was more mingling, I decided to take my chances. The two of us rode up the elevator in silence. The door opened to a small room with 5 seats, all empty. The view of the field was even better than it was below. My grandfather could only mingle in the suite for so long before he got fed up and came up here, Grayson told me. My brothers and I were the only ones allowed to join him. I sat and stared out at the stadium. There were so many people in the crowd. The energy, the chaos, the sheer volume of it was overwhelming. But in here, it was silent. I thought you might come to the game with Jameson. Grayson made no move to sit, like he didn't trust himself too close to me. The two of you have been spending a lot of time together. That irritated me, for reasons I couldn't even explain. Your brother and I have a bet going on. What kind of bet? I had no intention of answering, but when I let my eyes travel towards his, I couldn't resist saying the one thing guaranteed to get a reaction. Toby is alive. To someone else, Grayson's reaction might not have been noticeable, but I saw the jolt go through him. His gray eyes were glued to me now. Pardon me? Your uncle is alive and gets his jollies by pretending to be a homeless man in Newcastle, Connecticut. I probably could have been a little more delicate. Grayson came closer. He deigned to sit next to me, tension visible in his arms as he folded his hands together between his knees. What precisely are you talking about, Avery? I wasn't used to him calling me by my first name. It was too late to take it back what I said. I saw a picture of Toby in your Nan's locket. I closed my eyes, flashing back to that moment. I recognized him. He told me that his name was Harry. We played chess in the park every week for more than a year. I opened my eyes again. Jameson and I aren't sure what the story is there, yet. We have a bet going on about who finds out first. Who have you told? Grayson's voice was deadly serious. About the bet? About Toby. Nan was there when I found out. I was going to tell Alyssa, but... Don't, Grayson cut in. Don't breathe a word of this to anyone. You understand? I stared at him. I'm starting to get the feeling that I don't. My mother has no grounds on which to challenge the will. My aunt has no grounds on which to challenge the will. But Toby? Grayson had grown up as the heir apparent. Of all Hawthorne brothers, he had taken being disinherited the hardest. If my uncle is alive, he is the one person on this planet who might be able to break the old man's will. You say that like it's a bad thing, I told him. From my perspective, sure. But from yours? My mother cannot find out. Zara cannot find out. Grayson's expression was intense. Everything in him focused on me. McNamara, Ortega, and Jones cannot find out. In the week that Jameson and I have been discussing this turn of events, we have been completely focused on the mystery, not on what might happen if Tobias Hawthorne's lost heir suddenly turned up alive. Aren't you even a little bit curious, I asked Grayson, about what this means? I know what this means, Grayson replied tersely. I'm telling you what this means, Avery. If your uncle were interested in inheriting, don't you think he would have come forward by now? I asked. Unless there's a reason he's in hiding. Then let him hide. Do you have any idea how risky? Grayson didn't get to finish that question. What's life without a little risk, brother? I turned towards the elevator. I hadn't noticed it going down or coming back up, but there Jameson was. He strolled past Grayson and settled into the seat on the other side of me. Made any progress on our bet, Eris? I snorted. Wouldn't you like to know? Jameson smirked, then opened his mouth to say something else, but his words were drowned out by an explosion. More than one. Gunfire. Panic shot through my veins, and the next thing I knew, I was on the ground. Where's the shooter? This was like Blackwood, just like the Blackwood. Eris. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and then Jameson was on the floor with me. He brought his face level to mine and cupped my head in his hands. Fireworks, he told me. It's just fireworks, Eris, for halftime. My brain registered his words, but my body was still lost in the memory. Jameson had been there in the Blackwood with me. He'd thrown his body over mine. You're okay, Avery. Grayson knelt beside Jameson, besides me. We won't let anything hurt you. For a long, drawn-out moment, there wasn't a sound in the room except our breathing. Grayson's, Jameson's, and mine. Just fireworks, I repeated back to Jameson, my chest tight. Grayson stood, but Jameson stayed exactly where he was. He stared at me, his body against mine. There was something almost tender in his expression. I swallowed, and then his lips twisted into a wicked smile. For the record, Eris, I have been making excellent progress on our bet. He let his thumb trace the outline of my jaw. I shuddered, then glared at him and climbed to my feet. For the sake of my own sanity, I needed to win this bet. Fast. Chapter 5. Monday meant school. Private school. A private school with seemingly endless resource and modular scheduling, which left me with random pockets of free time scattered throughout the day. I used that time to dig up everything I could about Tobias Hawthorne. I already knew the basics. He was the youngest of Tobias Hawthorne's 3 children, and by most accounts, the favorite. At the age of 19, he and some friends had taken a trip to the private island of a Hawthorne family owned off the coast of Oregon. There was a deadly fire and a horrible storm, and his body was never recovered. The tragedy had made the news, and sifting through articles gave me a few more details about what had happened. 4 people had gone out to Hawthorne Island. None made it back alive. 3 bodies had been recovered. Toby's was presumed lost to the ocean storm. I found out what I could about the other victims. 2 of them were basically Toby clones, prep school boys, heirs. The third was a girl, Kaylee Rooney. From what I gathered, she was a local, a troubled teen from a small fishing village on the mainland. Several articles mentioned that she had a criminal record, a sealed juvenile record. It took me longer to find a source, though not necessarily a reputable one, that claimed that Kaylee Rooney's criminal record included drugs, assault, and arson. She started the fire. That was the story the press ran with without coming right out and saying the words. 3 promising young men, 1 troubled young woman, a party that spun out of control, everything engulfed in flames. Kaylee was the one the press blamed, sometimes between the lines, sometimes explicitly. The boys were lionized and eulogized and held up as shining beacons in their communities. Colin Andrews Wright, David Golding, Tobias Hawthorne II. So much brilliance, so much potential, gone soon. But Kaylee Rooney? She was trouble. My phone buzzed and I glanced down at the screen. A text from Jameson. I have a lead. Jameson was a senior at Heights Country Day. He was somewhere on this magnificent campus. What kind of lead, I thought, but I resisted giving him the satisfaction of texting back. Eventually, my phone informed me that he was typing. Tell me what you know, I thought. And then the text finally came through. Want to raise the stakes? The Heights Country Day refectory didn't look like a high school cafeteria. Long wooden tables stretched the length of a room. Portraits hung on the walls. Ceilings were high and arching, and the windows were made of stained glass. As I grabbed my food, I scanned the room reflexively for Jameson and found another Hawthorne brother instead. Xander Hawthorne was sitting at a dining table, staring intently at a contraption he set on its surface. The gizmo looked a bit like a Rubik's Cube, but elongated, with the tiles that could swivel and fold in any direction. I suspected it was a Xander Hawthorne original. He told me once that he was the brother most apt to be distracted by complex machinery and scones. That got me thinking as I watched him fidget 3 tiles back and forth in his fingers. When his brothers had been off playing their grandfather's games, Xander had often ended up sharing his scones with the old man. Did they ever talk about Toby? There was only one way to find out. I crossed the room to sit next to Xander, but he was so absorbed in the thought that he didn't even notice me. Back and forth, he twisted the tiles. Xander? He turned towards me and blinked. Avery, what a pleasant and not objectively unexpected surprise! His right hand meandered to the far side of a contraption and a notebook that sat there. He snapped it closed. I took that to mean Xander Hawthorne was up to something. Then again, so was I. Can I ask you something? That depends, Xander replied. Are you planning to share those baked goods? I looked down at the croissant and cookie on my tray and slid the latter his way. What do you know about your Uncle Toby? Why do you want to know? Xander took a bite of the cookie and frowned. Does this have craisins in it? What kind of monster mixes butterscotch chips and craisins? I was just curious, I said. You know what they say about curiosity, Xander warned me, happily taking another orangutan bite of cookie. Curiosity killed the Bex! Xander gulped down the bite he'd just taken with his face lighting up. I followed his gaze to Rebecca Laughlin, who was standing behind me, holding a lunch tray and looking the way she always did, like some kind of princess plucked from a fairy tale. Hair as red as rubies, impossibly wide-set eyes, guilty as sin. As she could hear my thoughts, Rebecca quickly averted her eyes. I could feel her trying not to look at me. I thought you might need help, she told Xander hesitantly. With the thing, Xander leaned forward and cut her off. I narrowed my eyes and turned my head back towards the youngest Hawthorne, and the notebook he flipped closed the moment he seen me. What thing? I asked suspiciously. I should go, Rebecca said behind me. You should sit and listen to me complain about craisins, Xander corrected. After a long moment, Rebecca sat, leaving a single chair empty between us. Her clear green eyes drifted towards mine. Avery, she looked down again. I owe you an apology. The last time Rebecca and I had spoken, she confessed to covering for Sky Hawthorne's role in my attempted murder. I'm not sure I want one, I said, an edge creeping into my voice. On an intellectual level, I understood that Rebecca had spent her whole life living in her sister's shadow, that Emily's death had wrecked her, that she felt some kind of sick responsibility to her dead sister to say nothing about Sky's plot against me. But on a more visceral level, I could have died. You're not still holding a little grudge about all of that, are you? Thea Calligris asked, claiming the seat next to Rebecca that had left open. Little grudge, I repeated. The last time I had been this close to Thea, she had admitted to setting me up to attend my debut in the Texas Society dressed like a dead girl. You play mind games, and Rebecca almost got me killed. What can I say? Thea let her fingertips brush Rebecca's. We're complicated girls. There was something deliberate about those words, that brush of skin. Rebecca looked at Thea, looked at their hands, and then curled her fingers towards her palm and placed her hands in her lap. Thea kept her eyes on Rebecca for 3 long seconds, then turned back to me. Besides, she said pertly, I thought this was supposed to be a private lunch. Private. Just Rebecca and Thea and Xander, the 3 of whom, last I checked, were barely on speaking terms with one another for complicated reasons involving, as Xander liked to say, star-crossed love, fake dating, and tragedy. What am I missing here? I asked Xander. The notebook, the way he dodged my question about Toby, the thing Rebecca had come to help him with, and now Thea. Xander saved himself from having to answer by jamming the rest of a cookie into his mouth. Well, I prompted as he chewed. Emily's birthday's on Friday, Rebecca said suddenly. Her voice was quiet, but what she just said sucked the oxygen from the room. There's a memorial fundraiser, Thea added, staring me down. Xander, Rebecca, and I scheduled this private lunch to iron out some plans. I wasn't sure I believed her, but either way, that was clearly my cue to leave.